with a lot from day to day. We don't need to be specific about that. You know exactly what we're talking about, starting with the tweets. We won't go on. But the shortcomings of this administration are clear. They're usually worth it, though, for two reasons. First, the ideas the president ran on are basically right. America First ought to be the operating principle of every American administration. By definition, it's an American administration. America should be first. But that's not the motto of most administrations, not even hardly. Second, the alternatives to what we have now are scary and getting scarier. The Democratic Party is completely irresponsible and increasingly anti-American. They prefer illegal aliens to our middle class. That's true, and it's terrifying. And someone needs to defend the country from these people. Trump mostly does that. So for these reasons, most of the president's supporters have stuck by him no matter what has happened, and a lot has happened. But there's a limit to the tolerance. They will not tolerate, and they shouldn't have to tolerate, by the way, betrayal on the core promises of his campaign. And that seems to be happening on guns, unfortunately. A few days ago, the president called for raising the minimum age for buying a gun to 21. By the way, that's 4 years after we let people join the military. They can join at 17. But he's saying you can't buy a gun until you're 21. Now, nobody's even arguing this will save actual lives because there's no research that it will. It's propaganda, and it's sneaky propaganda, by the way. It's an incremental step toward more gun restrictions. That's all it is. And then yesterday, the president went even further than that. He met with lawmakers to talk gun control at the White House. At that meeting, he went after Republicans who want to defend the Second Amendment, suggesting they're puppets of the NRA. At one point, the president said the government should, quote, take the guns first, go through due process second. Now, I mean, how honest do you want to be? Imagine if Barack Obama had said that. Just ignore due process and start confiscating guns. Well, Obama would have been denounced as a dictator. We would have denounced him first, trust me. Congress would be talking impeachment right now. Someone would be muttering about secession. Well, the media agreed with what the president said yesterday, so they've underplayed it, or they presented it as just a little battle between the president and the NRA. But it's not about the NRA. It's not even about the president. It's about the Constitution, and the Constitution remains the same no matter who's in power. That's the point of the Constitution. The Second Amendment protects your rights to bear arms. It doesn't say that obliquely or metaphorically. It says it explicitly, and the Supreme Court several times has interpreted it that way, explicitly protecting your rights to bear arms. You can't lose that right or any other right, the right to worship freely, the right to say what you want without due process, period. Those rights are what make us citizens and not mere subjects of the powerful. And the president needs to be reminded of that. Maybe we all do once in a while. If voters wanted that kind of government, they could have voted Democrat. And actually, they still have the chance to vote Democrat in the midterms, which he should keep in mind. Congressman Sean Duffy is a Republican who represents the state of Wisconsin. Congressman Jody Arrington is a Republican representing the state of Texas, and they join us both tonight. Congressman Arrington, to you first. I mean, if we just be honest for a second, because I think it puts it in stark relief, how would you have responded if President Obama said, well, we'll just take the guns and then we'll deal with the due process question?
I think more than disconcerting would be an understatement. We're talking about our God-given fundamental right to protect ourselves, not just against bad people, but against bad governments. Yeah. That's the context. And so, yeah, look, you mentioned a lot of things this president has done right. America First. He's strong on border security. He's strong on defense. And he's put a constitutionalist at the Supreme Court and has done a great job in that regard. But this one, he's going down that slippery slope, that knee-jerk reaction that we're accustomed to when you have these mass shootings. And I would oppose President Obama, and I would oppose President Trump and any president that negotiates away what is a fundamental right. And quite frankly, it's a right that if it were not exercised by our founding patriots, we wouldn't have the rest of our rights and we wouldn't have our independence. So this is a serious issue.
So, Congressman Duffy, news coverage, 24-hour news coverage is basically just 24 hours of attacking Trump. And so we kind of pull back from that because we want to offer an alternative, agree with Trump on a lot. There's a lot else going on. We try to cover that. But I also think it's important to remember that, you know, nobody should be tied to a person, but instead to principles. And so with that in mind, do you think it's worth just reminding the president, as we all need to remind it sometime, that there are deeper principles here than just kind of winning the news cycle?
Well, right, there's deeper principles like the Constitution, but I've applauded the president for doing these open, riffs with whether it's the victims of the shooting or with politicians, whether it's on DACA or on guns. I think he gets high marks for that, but also I think he can say some things that he might, upon reflection, regret. And I hope this is one of the things that he actually does regret. And what frustrates me in this whole conversation, Tucker, is the fact that the left wants to put new gun restriction and new gun laws in place because they want to argue to the American people that that's going to keep us safer. I think you and I, based on your intro, and Jody would agree, those new laws don't actually keep us safer. I was a prosecutor for 10 years in northern Wisconsin in Ashland County. And if Nicholas Cruz had lived there, this shooting would have never happened because my cops would have seen the threats that had come in, the tips that had come in, the fact that they'd been called to his house. And when Nicholas Cruz threw his mom up against the wall, they would have arrested him. They would have thrown him in jail. They would have come to me and said, we're going to have a bond hearing, and we're going to have, as a condition of bond, the fact that he can't possess a firearm. And then we want you to prosecute him, whether it's for a battery or a disorderly conduct, with an enhancer that's a domestic enhancer. And in 1997, Bill Clinton signed a law that if you're convicted of a crime that's a domestic crime, you can't possess a firearm. We would have gone through that procedure, and Nicholas Cruz would have not possessed a firearm because we have good law enforcement and good prosecutors. I don't know what happened in Florida, but to add new laws on top of laws that already aren't enforced is idiotic.
Well, and especially because I think, Congressman Arrington, it doesn't address the actual failures that led to this tragedy in Parkland, Florida. Why are we not having a national conversation about why the sheriff's department, the FBI, the school, the deputies on the scene all failed to protect those kids?
Well, I think that's right. It was a failure to identify, register, and engage or respond. And there was failure at every level of government. Clearly there were some training issues at the local level with respect to active shooting. We need to bone up on that, but we also have to secure our schools and get serious about that and accept the reality that this is a fallen world and accept the reality that no matter how many laws we have in place, if somebody is hell-bent on murder and destruction, they will stop at nothing, certainly not respect for a gun-free zone to carry out their dark desires. So the last line of defense, Tucker, is to make sure that our people in our communities can defend themselves, their families, and yes, the students. That means that we need to do more of what Texas is doing, in my opinion, and make sure that last line of defense is that teachers and coaches and administrators are appropriately trained, licensed, and a part of that security apparatus.
To defend the school. So, Congressman Duffy, we could talk for hours about this. We don't have much time at all. But what's your best guess for why this is happening in the first place? What would drive a 19-year-old to want to murder strangers?
Well, listen, I think there's a whole bunch of issues that are taking place outside of guns, Tucker. I think our kids in America are angry. They're being raised in single-family homes without fathers. As a congressman, being away, I know that our boys specifically need fathers in the home. They're being over-medicated, which you've talked about. We say they have attention deficit disorder, so we medicate them instead of parent them. We have violence that comes from Hollywood. We dehumanize life in those video games and in those movies and with abortion. There's a whole slew of issues that we have in America that we didn't have 40 years ago. And we have to address the root cause of what's bringing kids to be so angry and so detached. Listen, cell phones, Tucker, these kids, they don't talk to each other anymore. They don't know how to interact with people. And because they're detached because of their phones and parents aren't engaging them to draw them away from the phone and into conversation, they're isolated. That's a hard conversation to have. It's easier to say, I have a political agenda to take away guns, and that's where the left goes at CNN, instead of going, let's talk about the root cause of the problem, which is how we're parenting and raising our kids. We've driven out faith and morality out of culture and family. That's all part of the problem here.
Of course it is, and you'll be mocked for saying that, but even the people mocking you on some level know that you're absolutely right. They know you're right, because you are. Thank you both, gentlemen. Congressman.
Thanks, Doug.
Been a while since we've seen that animation. Earlier this week, we learned President Trump has already named his campaign manager for the 2020 election. We have far less certainty about the other side of the ticket. Tonight, correspondent Peter Ducey looks at some of the possibilities for the Democrat nomination battle.
The early search for a Democrat who could beat Trump is scattershot with dozens of names in the mix.
The good thing is we've just built 2 or 3 new hotels in Des Moines, and I think we're going to need them leading up to the caucuses because there are going to be a lot of candidates.
First, there's the Obama-era throwbacks. Former Vice President Joe Biden is first among Democrats in a recent Quinnipiac poll. Obama himself has said he thinks former Massachusetts Governor Deval Patrick would be a good president, and longtime Attorney General Eric Holder is already talking himself up.
I think I've got the guts.
The next category of contenders, the establishment. Virginia's former Governor Terry McAuliffe just told the Washington Free Beacon there's nobody better to take on Trump than him. California Governor Jerry Brown isn't ruling out a run, and New York Governor Andrew Cuomo is already testing out anti-Trump attack lines while borrowing his slogan.
And we're going to make America, America again!
If the party wants a progressive, there's plenty to pick from in the Senate, where every vote could be an audition for left-wing primary voters. There's Bernie Sanders, Kamala Harris, Elizabeth Warren, Sherrod Brown, Kirsten Gillibrand, and Cory Booker, who is playing coy.
I am up for re-election in 2020 as a United States Senator, and I'll see you there.
If it's mayors that motivate the base, there may be at least 3. Mitch Landrieu, formerly of New Orleans, Pete Buttigieg of South Bend, and Eric Garcetti from Los Angeles. Others rumored to want to leave LA for DC, celebrities like Oprah, George Clooney, even The Rock.
Seriously, would you run?
I'm seriously considering it, yes.
Well, you
Last but not least, the Democrats drawing attention for booking flights to Iowa and New Hampshire, like former Missouri Secretary of State Jason Kander, Montana Governor Steve Bullock, former HUD Secretary Julian Castro, Maryland Congressman John Delaney, who was already declared, and Massachusetts Congressman Seth Moulton.
Just because they come up doesn't necessarily mean they're running this cycle, but you know, in this day and age with Donald Trump, anyone could be president, so why not at least think about it?
That politically diverse group of Democrats running reveals that nobody knows what the base is going to look like. And that is why the New Hampshire Democratic Chairman Ray Buckley tells me he thinks the split in early states is going to wind up being generational, because Democrats are going to have a choice between candidates in their 30s and 40s versus some in their 60s and 70s. Brett?
20 in 2020, maybe?
That was 23.
Okay.
Bonus.
The debate over the Second Amendment. Last night we criticized the president for saying authorities ought to confiscate guns first and worry about due process later. That is unconstitutional, as we pointed out. We're pretty sure the president is reconsidering that. News reports today say he is. But we didn't want to leave the impression last night that the administration is the main threat to gun rights or to due process. It's not. In fact, it's not even close. Here's a reminder of how the other side feels about those things.
Force these allegedly Christian men and women who stuff their pockets with money from the NRA year after year after year to do something now.
So many thousands of people are dying every year for this so-called liberty.
You have a whole generation of young people who essentially see the NRA as their enemy. To them, the NRA is like the KKK. It's just some hostile force that is against them, that's risking their lives.
The Bible warns us not to worship false gods, and yet it does seem that much of America is indeed worshipping at the altar of the gun gods.
We're getting lectures on Christianity from the media. Pretty amazing. Trump did say something stupid about due process the other day, and the fact is, though, that the left has been opposing due process, the most basic of our constitutional rights, for a long time, particularly on the subject of gun control. When was the last time you heard a Democratic politician praise the Australian solution to gun violence? A lot. If you're watching CNN, you probably heard it today. They say it all the time. The question is, do you know anything about how Australia implemented gun control? Well, confiscation. They took the guns away from the population by force, and not just from criminals and people who've been convicted of wrongdoing. The government of Australia took guns from law-abiding people who had done nothing wrong. They punished the innocent. What exactly did that look like? Well, here's an ad from one of Australia's gun confiscation efforts. It shows naked men in a prison shower and warns the public to turn their guns in, or else they'll be sent to prison too. Effectively, the government threatened law-abiding citizens with prison rape if they didn't surrender their guns. That's what liberals are calling for in this country every time they talk about the Australian solution. And there are a lot more ads like that. We're going to tweet them out tonight. By the way, that's what the assault weapons ban is. Democrats are pushing for a law that would outlaw more than 200 kinds of firearms, as well as all guns that have various irrelevant cosmetic features like bayonet lugs and lots of other things people wrote the law know nothing about. If that law passes, and it might if the Democrats take Congress, you will be punished. You'll have fewer rights. But wait a second. You've done nothing wrong. You never shot anybody. You have no plans to shoot anybody. Doesn't matter. Democrats will treat you the same way they treat convicted felons, as unworthy to be trusted with firearms. Meanwhile, their bodyguards will still have the most powerful guns available. Of course they will, because they can, because they're in charge and you're not. The left is also demanding the government bar people under 21, these are people who are eligible to vote and serve in the military, from buying firearms. Now, again, most people under 21 haven't done anything wrong. They haven't been convicted of a crime or committed crimes. But a few of them have. So Democrats are saying all must be punished. Imagine applying the same standard to other constitutional rights. For example, let's say somebody shouted fire in a crowded theater and scores died. Would the rest of us lose our right to free speech? These are real questions. They're inconvenient so soon after the massacre in Parkland, for which the country is still grieving. But we should remember, this is a country worth living in precisely because we take the Constitution seriously. When we stop taking it seriously, it won't be a country worth living in. President Trump seems to have remembered that. Many in the left never knew it, and they don't care anyway. You often hear progressives say they want an honest conversation about guns. Well, of course we do too. And that's why we've invited the heads of almost every different gun control group to come on this show and tell us what they really believe. We'll let them talk. Mike Bloomberg's group, George Soros's group, Gabby Giffords' group, they've all refused to come on. They're delighted to appear on CNN, obviously, where they're celebrated and never challenged. We'd still like to have that conversation because we think it's important, so we're joined tonight by someone who will come on, Antoine C. Wright. He's founder and CEO of Blueprint Strategy, and he joins us tonight. Antoine, thanks for coming on.
Thank you, Tucker, for having me.
Well, I appreciate it because so many others with your views won't. It's an analogy, but I think it's still worth talking about. What I just mentioned a minute ago about another constitutional right, the freedom of speech. If someone were to misuse that freedom in a way that was illegal, would that mean the rest of us had to give up some of our right to the freedom of speech?
Absolutely not, Tucker, but here's what we all have to do. We all have to take a deep breath and focus on the issue at hand. For me, the focus on the issue at hand is trying to figure out how we prevent another mass shooting in this country, right, so one more parent can not have to deal with burying their child once again. That's where my focus is. I don't want to make this, Tucker, I don't want to make this about left or right, liberal or conservative. This is simply about trying to do something to prevent another mass shooting.
Well obviously, but wait, hold on. I totally agree with that. I think every decent person, maybe even some non-decent people agree. Nobody thinks these are good. They're hurting the country. We're all against them. The question is, what do you do? There are policy solutions being floated, and the question is, are they good ideas or not? Are they consistent with the Constitution or not? So what is the solution to these shootings that you think would work?
Well, here's what I think reasonable people believe. We know that somewhere north of 65% of the American people believe we should do something. Here's what I think we should do. One, I'm not one of those people who say we need to take away everyone's gun. I know that's the fallback Republican talking point. Democrats want to take away their guns. That's not true. I'm a proud weapon owner. I appreciate being able to carry my gun freely in this country. But here's what I do believe. If you have mental health issues, there's probably a good chance that you should not be able to have a firearm. If we can close the Charleston loophole, I'm from South Carolina. My dear friend and mentor, Senator Clemente Pinckney, was killed in a church in Charleston because Dylan Ruth was able to purchase a gun when the background check did not come back in a certain amount of days.
But hold on, let's just get to the first one. So the law currently says, and since you're a gun owner, you know this because you had to fill it out on the federal form, that if you've been adjudicated mentally ill, if you've been determined to have a mental illness, you can't buy a gun. That's already the law. So what changes would you make since, again, that's already the law?
Well, here's the thing. Different states have different laws. Recently in South Carolina,
I'm sorry to interrupt. That's federal. That's on the federal form, the federal background check the DOJ does on every gun owner. If you buy a gun, you have to fill this out. And you're not allowed to buy a gun if you've been adjudicated mentally ill. So what specific change would you make?
Well, I think the word mental illness, it varies. One doctor can diagnose you one thing, one the other. But I think we need to be consistent when we talk about the issue of mental health issues, and that's just one thing I would change. The other thing
what would the change? I mean, I don't want to be obstinate, but I just want to get to the specifics here because the specifics matter. It's public policy. What specific change would you make?
on the issue specifically of mental health. In some places, people with mental illnesses can go into a gun show or either online and buy a weapon. You and I both knew that. That's why
we just saw that happen. Hold on. We just saw that happen in Florida. A kid with mental illness was able to buy a gun because the school refused to turn him over to the cops. So, but how would you stop that? Like, what would you do specifically?
That's my point. We have to have comprehensive, extensive background checks so that we can prevent another person. Who has mental health issues from having a gun.
Okay. But here's where we're having an actual bipartisan, real conversation. We both agree that the mentally ill, dangerous people shouldn't have guns. But what do you do specifically? We already have a comprehensive background check. Would you, I don't know, tell me your solution. I'm sincerely interested.
Well, Tucker, if you let me finish getting through, we're going to have to tighten up on closing the gap to make sure that these laws are in place, making sure they're truly enforced.
But the law's already there, so I'm confused.
Again, enforcement, there are laws on the books, but we have to enforce them and tighten, strengthen them where we need to.
Okay. Let me ask you this question.
I think you can agree with that, right, Tucker?
Yeah, I don't know what that means. It doesn't actually mean anything. I mean, it's the kind of thing that all of us, even Jimmy Kimmel, can sort of nod and feel virtuous, but like...
Tucker, it means enforcing the laws on books. There's no reason why this young man in Florida shouldn't have been able to.
Let me ask you a question, though, since we're on this subject. So there are hundreds of thousands, close to 500,000 returning veterans from Iraq and Afghanistan who get money from the federal government. A lot of them are on medication because they have a mental illness. They've said that. It's called PTSD.